Everyone knows Genesis, but almost no one has heard of the book that came to complete it and was silenced. The Book of Jubilees is not just an alternative version of creation, it's a threat to the order that was built after it. While Genesis shows the events, Jubilees reveals the backstage. It exposes hidden cycles of time, the language of angels, the prophecies involving Moses, the Watchers, and what is still to come. And maybe that's why it was banned, because instead of generating control, it awakened spiritual autonomy. Imagine a sacred book that says, the angels didn't fall out of rebellion, but out of love. That they came to earth not only to corrupt, but to teach. That they created hybrid lineages, not as divine punishment, but as a desperate attempt to save something that was already corrupted. This narrative doesn't just change how we see the Nephilim. It challenges the institutional judgment imposed over what is called heaven and what is condemned as hell. The Book of Jubilees doesn't teach only through words. It teaches through silence, through what was left out of modern Bibles. The text is attributed to the angel of the presence, who dictated to Moses the secrets that were never meant to be taught to the common people, only to the children of the covenant, a spiritual lineage capable of decoding the hidden messages buried in dates, genealogies, and cosmic patterns. And here's the detail no one told you. The Book of Jubilees presents creation not as a random event, but as part of a sacred calendar, a timeline divided with mathematical precision, a time that was deliberately replaced by another. Most of the world today follows the Roman calendar, an artificial time, political and commercial. But the Book of Jubilees described the original calendar, exactly 364 days, aligned with the cycles of creation, the sacred feasts, and the celestial constellations. And by changing that time, humanity lost access to spiritual gateways. Feasts like Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, originally aligned with the heavens, were moved, and with them, the direct contact with the divine. This isn't a theory, it's history. Hidden, yes, but still pulsing between the lines of faith. This book was considered so dangerous that it was completely removed from Western versions of the Bible. Yet curiously, it remained preserved in the Ethiopian tradition, treated as a treasure. There, it was never banned. On the contrary, it was honored, because they understood it was more than a record. It was a map, a spiritual blueprint for those who seek to walk in sync with the original will of the Creator. And here begins the discomfort. If this book truly came from above, why was it erased? Maybe the answer lies in how the book portrays time, sin, and salvation. Unlike dogmas that preach guilt and eternal punishment, Jubilees speaks of conscious repentance, alignment with heaven, and cyclical restoration. It's as if it whispers, you don't need intermediaries, you need awareness. And for a religious structure built on mediation, that's unbearable. The book doesn't attack faith, it frees faith from its chains, and that silent liberation, to many, is an act of rebellion. But there's something even deeper. Jubilees reveals that the sins of the Watchers, and of humanity, were recorded in heavenly tablets, not for condemnation, but for restoration, at the appointed time. And according to the book, that time is drawing near. That's why it wasn't just ignored. It was hunted, because it declares that true justice will not come by human hands, but by cosmic cycles already set in motion. And no one can stop the time of God. The book also highlights the spiritual lineage of Enoch, the first man to walk with God and vanish. According to Jubilees, his wisdom was secretly passed down through generations until it reached the righteous of the final age. In other words, maybe you, maybe those who are awakening now to an inner call no one can explain. This book doesn't speak to the ones who shout. It speaks to those who hear in silence, those who feel something is wrong with what was taught, but until now, had no proof. Now they do. And before we move on to the most sensitive revelations, one question must be left open. What if everything you've learned about creation, sin, and salvation was based on a fragment, not the full story? What would that change in your spiritual life, in how you pray, how you love, how you reconcile with lost time? The answer is still unfolding, but the first seal has already been broken, and what it revealed cannot be forgotten. If something inside you stirred while listening, it's because this truth wasn't new, just forgotten. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments, I remember too. Let's find the others. For centuries, the great religions have debated dates, doctrines, and dogmas as if time were just a number. But to the ancients, time was alive. It was sacred. The Book of Jubilees doesn't measure time with clocks, but with purpose. Each cycle, each seventh part, each jubilee marks an invisible spiritual shift, something only those who walk with an awakened heart can perceive. And here's the shock. That time was replaced, thrown out of alignment, as if humanity's spiritual compass had been swapped for a broken clock. The book presents a perfect count. 7 weeks of years, 7 weeks of jubilees, 7 days of creation, all moving to a rhythm that pulses with the cosmos, the heavens, and the human soul. With every completed cycle, there's a new beginning, a new calling, a new cleansing. But that time was corrupted, the story was scrambled, and those who tried to restore the original rhythm were labeled heretics. So the question is, who profits from disorder? Who thrives on forgetfulness? The calendar found in Jubilees places the sacred feasts exactly where heaven drew them, not where the empire wanted them. The year begins with spring. The harvests mark gratitude. The 7th month is for reflection and purification. Time ceases to be a mechanical gear and becomes a spiritual organism again, a bridge between heaven and earth. And once this is understood, faith becomes alive, breathing, no longer imposed. And that, for earthly powers, is a threat. Imagine millions of people realigning with that original time, praying on the right day, fasting in moments of transition, celebrating with the heavens instead of with the market. The impact wouldn't be merely spiritual, it would be structural. Control would dissolve, because a soul in sync with divine cycles needs no walls, no fear, no human mediators to feel close to God. It needs only memory. And the Book of Jubilees is a call to the memory that was erased. The few scholars who dared to study it discovered something disturbing. The dates and events it describes align with surgical precision with other forgotten prophecies. From the Book of Enoch, 4 Ezra, the Psalms of Solomon, and even the Revelation of John, there is a hidden thread connecting all these texts. A thread the editors of the modern canon deliberately severed, not by accident, but by strategy. Because if that thread is restored, the story changes, and with it, so does the future. Jubilees reveals that history was told in 49-year cycles, and each cycle had a spiritual role. Some were of downfall, others of revelation, some of destruction, others of healing. But everything follows a pattern. Nothing is random, nothing is drifting. What we call chaos may just be part of a larger cycle we've forgotten how to read. And maybe that's why the world feels out of control, because we lost the ability to decode the time we're living in. According to the text, Moses didn't just hear what was dictated by the angel of the presence. He was taken outside of time. He saw past, present, and future as one single body, as a temple built of days and nights. And when he returned, he didn't bring just commandments. He brought maps that were destroyed, distorted, or hidden away. Because those who walk with the maps of heaven do not bow to the decrees of earth, and that is dangerous to those who rule by fear. Among the most ignored verses in the book is the description of the heavenly tablets, spiritual records, where everything has already been written. Names, actions, intentions, promises, betrayals, but not as accusation, as pure memory. And that memory will be used at the time of judgment. The problem is, for those who live by manipulating memory, a book like this is unbearable, because it shows that justice will not come from institutions, but from time, from something no empire can control. And here's the part that hurts. Maybe you've lived your whole life following a broken calendar, celebrating empty feasts, fasting during dead seasons, praying out of sync, and without knowing why, you always felt something was off. Now it begins to make sense, because heaven has a cadence, and the soul can feel when the rhythm is wrong. The Book of Jubilees didn't come to condemn, it came to remind, and in that remembrance, something reignites. Spiritual time is starting to pulse again, and those who hear the call are beginning to realize it's not about ritual, it's about resonance. Not about dogma, but about alignment. Maybe the world is entering a prophetic cycle once more, and if that's true, the signs will be right before your eyes. but only those who know how to see with the time of the heart will recognize them. And that's what we're about to begin unveiling. If your heart felt that time is out of place, maybe you're ready to return to the original rhythm. Like the video, share it with someone who feels the same disconnection, and comment with the word alignment. The question that has been lingering since the beginning must now be faced. Why was a book so deeply spiritual, so aligned with creation, treated as a threat? The answer isn't only in what it says, but in what it invalidates. The Book of Jubilees places God once again at the center of spiritual guidance, without the need for intermediaries. No hereditary priesthood, no celestial bureaucracy. And within any organization built on mediation, that is intolerable, because where there is direct access, there is no control. The text reveals that the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, were already keeping the commandments even before Sinai. That changes everything. It means the law didn't start with Moses. It already existed, on another plane, inscribed on the tablets of heaven, long before they were carved into stone in the desert. Revelation wasn't a divine imposition. It was a remembrance of what the Spirit already knew. And if true obedience is simply active memory, then those born free never needed chains to love God. But the book goes even further. It says the world was handed over to 70 angelic princes after the Tower of Babel, and only Israel remained under the Eternal. This narrative appears in Deuteronomy 32:8-9, but almost no one talks about it. It means the nations walk under other forces, other rulers. That there is a silent spiritual war behind political and religious structures, and that the history of salvation isn't just a journey of faith. It's a battlefield between invisible realities. Those 70 spiritual princes mentioned in Jubilees may be behind many human systems, including those claiming to speak for God. The idea is brutal. Not everything that speaks in the name of the sacred comes from the sacred. Not everything that bears crosses, temples, and scriptures acts with purity. There are structured counterfeits, theological labyrinths built not to liberate, but to imprison. And by exposing this with such clarity, the Book of Jubilees becomes a threat, not to faith, but to those who hijacked it. By showing that the fallen angels taught humanity writing, astrology, and alchemy, but also revealed truths that had been hidden, the text breaks the binary narrative of absolute good versus evil. It shows that even those who fall can teach, and that discernment is not in prohibition, but in wise usage. This places the faithful back in a position of responsibility, not passive obedience. And religious systems don't like conscious people. They prefer obedient ones. Another silenced point. The book speaks of celestial feasts celebrated not only by humans but by angels themselves. There is a cosmic pattern of celebration, a calendar followed by the righteous on earth and by the angels in heaven. This means that aligning with this time is not just practicing religion, it's tuning into the universe, into the kingdom of God in motion, into the original vibration of creation. This isn't ritual. It's reconnection, and that terrifies those who live off separation. The Book of Jubilees also places the root of sin in the spiritual and genetic corruption that followed the fall of the angels, not just in the disobedience of Adam and Eve. This reframes the entire narrative of guilt. It shows that humanity was a victim before it was guilty, that the battle is for restoration, not punishment, and that salvation is a return to origin, not a theological bargain. That's where the text becomes dangerous. It humanizes the fall and spiritualizes redemption. And here's a detail few notice. The book never proposes the foundation of a new religion. There is no temple, no centralized priesthood, no liturgy of power. Everything happens in direct covenant with the Creator, in silence, in fasting, on dates marked by the heavens. Faith here is not a show. It's secret communion. There's no pulpit. There's an inner altar, and that disarms any system that depends on visibility to exist. Those who rediscover this book feel something that can't be explained in words, a kind of spiritual homesickness, as if the spirit recognizes something the mind still can't understand, a feeling that someone finally said what had always been hidden, the echo of an ancestral truth that the heart already knew, but had never heard spoken aloud. And that's why it must be read in silence, because its revelation runs deeper than sound, but the greatest conflict is still to come. Because this book doesn't just recount the past, it announces the future. A future in which the cycles are completed, the seals are opened, and the righteous are restored. a time when deception will be exposed, and the memory of the just will be reawakened. That time has already begun, and will reveal how this awakening is already manifesting, even if most still don't perceive it. Every revelation that touched you today is a seed, and those who share this truth help the spiritual field bloom. Comment, "I heard what no one wants to hear," and subscribe to continue this journey. Have you ever felt like something is shifting? Like the world keeps spinning, but there's another movement happening inside, and as if invisible layers are slowly unfolding. There are people waking up from a kind of spiritual amnesia. They begin to question the calendar, the rituals, the narratives. They feel something is off, but they don't know how to name it yet. The Book of Jubilees seems to have been written precisely for this moment, for this type of soul, for those who can no longer live under hollow dogmas, but still believe a hidden truth exists. This awakening doesn't happen in temples, or in crowds. It begins in dark rooms, in deep silences, in tears that fall without explanation. It's a kind of longing that isn't for someone. It's for a time the soul remembers, but the body has forgotten. It's as if the spirit hears an ancient bell, calling it back. And that bell rings to the same rhythm described in the Book of Jubilees. Because the soul recognizes the time of God, even when the world's clock denies it. The signs are everywhere. Ordinary people, with no connection to sacred texts, are reporting dreams with specific dates, spontaneous fasts on forgotten days, strong intuitions that something is about to happen. And when these people discover the contents of the Book of Jubilees, everything fits. The dates, the cycles, the sensations. It's as if something that always existed in the invisible finally begins to manifest. In the skin, in the eyes, in daily life. Faith stops being belief and becomes perception. This is not hollow mysticism. It's awakened spirituality. The difference between following an imposed calendar and feeling the sacred time in your bones. What this book proposes is not a new dogma, but a reconnection. It doesn't seek followers. It awakens travelers, and each soul that begins to see the world through this other rhythm starts stepping out of the spiritual matrix that's been imposed for centuries. They begin walking in another time, even while living in this one. The war between calendars isn't just symbolic, it's spiritual. The official calendar was built to organize empires. The calendar of Jubilees was revealed to align souls. One rules by fear, the other pulses through consciousness. And each time someone stops celebrating the market's time and returns to honoring heaven's rhythm, an invisible battle is won. Because the enemy of the spirit isn't obvious evil. It's deception dressed as tradition. It's error polished with reverence. That's why so many are falling spiritually ill. Because they are out of time. They say beautiful prayers, but on empty days. They fast by obligation, not by resonance. They celebrate feasts whose roots were already severed. And the soul feels it. It feels something is out of place, and it starts to scream. Anxiety, anguish, spiritual exhaustion. Often it's not a lack of faith, it's too much dissonance. And the Book of Jubilees might be the bridge back. But this return won't be collective. It will be secret. Just like it was with Enoch. Just like it was with Moses on the mountaintop. Just like it was with prophets who heard words no one else wanted to receive. The calling is happening, but not out loud. It comes in the form of discomfort, of unanswered questions, of dreams that refuse to leave, and when the soul is ready, the forgotten texts will present themselves, because they were not written for the eyes, but for the ears of the heart. Scripture says, "He who has ears to hear, let him hear." But what few understand is that this spiritual ear only opens when the appointed time arrives, and that time is approaching. The cycles point to it. The global crises, the collapse of institutional faith, the hunger for meaning, all of this is not the end. It's the prelude to return, the time of restoration. And those who hear the call will no longer need proof. They will feel. They will be guided by the inner rhythm, by sacred memory. That's why the Book of Jubilees can no longer be ignored, because it's not just speaking of what was, it's awakening what is to come. Every page is a mirror of time, every verse, a disguised alarm. And now that it has resurfaced, there's no way to unsee it, no way to unremember. The soul that finds its cycle again will not return to sleep, Because once the Spirit recognizes the Father's rhythm, everything else loses meaning. But there is still one greater secret hidden in this book, something few have spoken of, and that was never explained in common sermons. A revelation buried in the final words Moses heard from the angel and was not allowed to speak. That sealed secret is the heart of the book, the final key, and that is what we'll uncover in the next chapter. If you felt like this calling was personal, don't ignore it. Comment, "I recognize this sound," and click subscribe. Those who awaken always find each other, even in silence. In the final verses of the Book of Jubilees, something strange happens. After pages and pages of revelations, dates, lineages, and divine instructions, the text slows down. The angel who had been speaking suddenly falls silent, and Moses, who until then had been asking questions and writing down every word, responds with fasting, not with doctrine, not with discussion, but with silence. This gesture, often overlooked, may be the most profound of all, because it reveals a truth that cannot be explained, only lived. And perhaps that's exactly why it was forbidden. What did he hear? What was the final revelation that made him withdraw in reverence, rather than descend the mountain with more laws and declarations? The book doesn't say, or rather, it says, by omission. We're told Moses was instructed to keep certain words for the righteous of a future generation, words that wouldn't be understood by all, because they weren't information, they were activation, and that difference is subtle, but radical. Information can be taught, activation must be felt, and that cannot be written. This idea appears in other apocryphal texts as well, that the deepest spiritual secrets are not passed through formal teaching, but through vibrational transmission. And Moses, by fasting in silence, shows us the way to access those layers, through emptiness, through time outside of time, through returning to the original place where the soul listens without noise. That's why the Book of Jubilees ends not with a climax for the mind, but with revolution for the spirit, because there, for the first time, silence becomes the answer. Ethiopian tradition says Moses' final secret was tied to the end of time, that the angel revealed not just what had happened, but what was still to come, that there was a cycle waiting to be completed, and only those who held the secret covenant would perceive it. This covenant wasn't public, it wasn't institutional, it was personal, and its seal was silence itself. Because those who know don't need to convince anyone, they only need to remain aligned. What's implied is that there is a knowledge that only activates when the spirit reaches the right point in time, an internal cycle that intersects with a cosmic one, like a code unlocking itself. And when that point comes, when heaven and heart beat in harmony, what was sealed reveals itself, without being shouted, because those who need to hear will hear, even without sound, even without explanation. This isn't occultism. This is spiritual maturity. And this is where many stumble, because they expect mysteries to come with subtitles, proofs, sermons, videos, and manuals. But the deepest mysteries don't work that way. They aren't explained. They erupt from within. A memory that ignites, an understanding that bypasses logic and speaks to the soul. And that's what the Book of Jubilees tried to preserve. Access to the language before words, the verb before sound, the covenant before religion. That's why the ancient spiritual masters fasted, not to ask something from God, but to silence everything that wasn't God, to hear what only the Spirit could grasp. Moses, by doing this, left us a model of activation, not a model of doctrine. He didn't found a religion based on what he heard on the mountain. He kept silent, because he understood that if he spoke, it would be corrupted, but if he fasted, it would be preserved. The silence of Moses is not the absence of voice. It is the presence of truth. A truth too vast for words, too sacred for scrolls, one that could only be carried by those already in sync. That's why the angel said, "Keep it for the righteous who are yet to come," because the time hadn't arrived. The world wasn't ready, and maybe now, only now, we're approaching that point of maturity where this activation can finally unfold. And you feel it. You can't explain it, but you feel it. That something inside you is awakening. That silence has spoken louder than sermons. That questions now matter more than ready-made answers. That time is calling for a deeper listening. And if that's true, then you are part of the generation Moses saw, those who would carry the codes. Not many, but deep, silent, unstoppable. Next, we'll reveal why this knowledge could only return now, and how your life, your routine, and your personal history may be directly connected to this hidden cycle of restoration. Get ready, because after the silence comes the return. If silence spoke louder than words today, comment "I understand" without hearing. And turn on the bell, because the next signs and won't come out loud. What makes this moment so special? Why is the Book of Jubilees, forgotten for centuries, suddenly resurfacing now, among ordinary people, silent seekers, restless hearts? The answer lies within the text itself. It describes that, at the end of a complete cycle of Jubilees, truth would rise again, and the righteous, those who preserved the memory without even knowing they carried it, would be called back, not by prophets, not by institutions, but by time, by the inner rhythm that begins to vibrate. This rhythm doesn't make a sound. It creates urgency, thirst, a desire to unlearn everything in order to learn again. That's why so many are turning away from religious speeches and searching for meaning in ancient, forbidden, ignored texts. The modern world offered comfort, but not truth, distraction, but no direction. And now that the noise has become unbearable, silence is finally being desired. And in that silence, the lost texts begin to call again. Does it seem like coincidence that Jubilees is reappearing at the exact moment when the world faces global crises, moral collapse, and a collective sense that something is out of alignment? It's not, because these moments of rupture are precisely the turning points on the sacred calendar. They are signs that a new cycle has begun. And those who are awake won't see just chaos. They will see repositioning. They won't see just destruction. They will see revelation. The time of restoration doesn't begin with rebuilding. It begins with dismantling. The destruction of the false must come before the revelation of the true. That's why the structures are collapsing. That's why the idols are being exposed. Because appearances without essence can no longer be sustained. And the Book of Jubilees proclaims exactly this, that a time would come when judgment would no longer be external, but internal. A silent judgment. One that begins when you realize it's no longer possible to live disconnected. When you realize the truth was always there, but you couldn't yet see it. And this truth is not revealed with noise. It reveals itself through rhythm, through synchronicity. You begin to dream of dates. You feel the urge to fast for no clear reason. You sense that certain days carry a different energy. And without knowing it, you are already walking in sacred time. You are stepping out of the human clock and into the divine cadence. The body begins to reject empty routines. The soul begins to cry out for alignment. And what once felt like coincidence begins to feel like calling. Maybe you were drawn to this video out of curiosity, but what's happening now is much greater than that. You're not just watching content. You're being called back to something that was lost, something that belongs to your spiritual lineage. Because those who recognize the Book of Jubilees are not just anyone, they are souls who've heard it before. In other lives, in other times, on other mountains, your life may have felt disconnected up to this point, but it wasn't. Every wound, every search, every break led you here, to this moment of reunion with the origin. And now that you know, you can't walk at the same pace as before, because time has shifted, and with it, so has your mission. This isn't about converting anyone. It's about aligning yourself. It's not about teaching. It's about vibrating. Because those who walk in God's time transform their surroundings. Even without saying a word, what you're feeling now is what Moses felt. A silence that speaks. An emptiness that activates. A memory returning. And that memory comes with responsibility. Because now that you know, you can't pretend you don't. The world will keep spinning as before, but inside, you won't be the same. And wherever you go, you will carry this secret rhythm, this frequency that few can name. And soon, you'll begin to attract others who hear the same sound. This is the silent prophecy of the Book of Jubilees, that the righteous would be awakened, not by words, but by time. And now that the time has come, they begin to gather, not in temples, but in resonance. In eyes that recognize each other, in prayers that need no voice, in fasts that ask for nothing, but return everything. And when this silent army is complete, restoration will begin, not from the top down, but from the inside out. But something else still needs to be revealed, because if the time of return has already begun, then so has the time of separation. We will speak next about those who will not recognize this time, and what that means spiritually. Maybe this video was the answer your soul had been waiting for. If it was, comment, "Now I remember," subscribe to the channel, and keep your eyes open for the next cycle. While many remain trapped in calendars that only repeat routines, a small group is beginning to sense the difference between date and time, between chronology and purpose, between religion and resonance. This difference is invisible to ordinary eyes, but to the eyes of the spirit, it means everything. That's why the separation has already begun, not through wars or loud divisions, but through internal choices, through resonances that either align or fracture, through souls that even when physically close, are already walking in opposite directions. The Book of Jubilees foretold this, that there would come a time when the righteous would be called back to the original rhythm, and that this calling would create a division, not between good and evil, but between those who hear and those who ignore, those who feel and those who mock. There will be no explanations that convince, because this separation is not based on logic. It's based on frequency, on spiritual vibration. And the further sacred time advances, the sharper that divide becomes. You've likely felt this already. Conversations that once made sense now feel hollow. Relationships that once felt strong now lose their invisible bond. Practices that used to be normal now disturb the soul. This isn't guilt. It's not judgment. It's natural separation. The vibrational field is shifting. What once seemed harmless now feels heavy. What once passed unnoticed now stings. And that sting is a signal. You are leaving the time of the world and entering the time of the spirit. Those who cannot make this transition will respond with resistance. They'll laugh. They'll accuse. They'll call you strange, radical, mystical, heretical. But it's not about you. It's about what they can't yet hear. The sound of change hasn't reached them, and maybe it never will. Because the book speaks of this too, that some were handed over to other powers, that they would not recognize the time of visitation, that they would pass through the cycles without realizing what was happening. But the most painful part is that this separation won't be loud. It will be slow, silent, emotionally uncomfortable, because you'll continue loving people who won't walk with you. You'll wish they could see what you see, but they won't, because they're not in the same rhythm. And that demands spiritual maturity, to keep walking even through tears, to walk in light even when surrounded by shadows, not to feel superior, but to remain faithful to the time that called you. This is where many step back, because they don't want to lose people, habits, comforts. But restoration requires surrender, not as punishment, but as alignment. You can't walk in two rhythms at once. You either follow heaven's calendar or the marketplace clock. And every small decision, what you consume, what you say, what you celebrate, reaffirms the path you're on. The separation isn't declared. It's built step by step, choice by choice. But there's an implicit promise in the book that those who hear the call will be protected, will be guided, will be hidden at the appointed time. Because separation precedes judgment, and judgment won't be what the world expects. It won't come with fire raining from the sky, but with light invading hearts. And for many, that light will bring joy. For others, pain. Because where there is falsehood, light burns. Where there is truth, it heals. And no one will be able to say they weren't warned. This separation is also internal. Between your old self and your awakened self. Between your programmed habits and your restored consciousness. Between what you used to do by tradition and what you now do by revelation. And this inner war will be intense. Because the ego doesn't want to lose control, but the spirit refuses to be ignored. And the more you walk in sacred time, the more this battle resolves. Not by force, but by surrender. You were called to live in the time God appointed, not the one built by men. And that requires courage, because it requires solitude, vigilance, silence, but it also brings fullness. And with every step on this path, others like you will begin to appear in silence, in harmony, in reverence, and you'll recognize each other. Because the righteous don't need badges, they need rhythm. And when that rhythm is restored, even the angels will sing again. But before that, there is one last adjustment, one final seal to be opened. Because if the separation has already begun, then the time of judgment has too. And next, we will reveal how the Book of Jubilees describes this judgment, not as punishment, but as restorative justice. The separation has begun, but you are not alone. If something here touched you, comment, "I've chosen my rhythm." Share this with someone who needs it, and prepare yourself for a judgment that begins in the heart. Everyone expects a loud final judgment, trumpets, disasters, fire from the skies. But the Book of Jubilees offers another version, a silent judgment, one that doesn't begin in the world, it begins in the spirit, a correction that comes from within when the soul is confronted not by a courtroom, but by the truth about itself. And that truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. There are no more excuses, no more distractions. Only a mirror remains. Either you're in tune with heaven, or you're moving against it. This judgment is not meant to punish. It's meant to restore. It's the moment when cycles close, and what was corrupted must be returned to its original state. That means everything built outside of sacred time, structures, traditions, narratives, ego, begins to collapse. Not because of a curse, but because the time has changed, and what doesn't move with God's rhythm decays. Judgment, then, is a natural process. Like a harvest, each reaps what they have sown. The righteous are not the perfect, they are the sensitive. Those who, even when they fall, keep listening. Even when lost, keep seeking. Even when tired, keep emptying themselves to receive the new. And this new is memory, the memory of original time, the memory of the sound the world forgot. And that memory comes as light, not as an idea, but as presence. And when it enters, everything changes. What was guilt becomes direction. What was fear becomes reverence. What was doubt becomes active silence. That's why, in the judgment described in the Book of Jubilees, names are not read aloud. They either shine or fade, because judgment is not spoken, it is revealed. Those who carry light appear. Those who don't vanish. There is no speech, no defense, only vibration. And that vibration is shown in the eyes, in the actions, in the words unspoken, in how someone breathes before the sacred, in how they face time, in how they treat the invisible. And maybe that's why the book was hidden, because it doesn't accuse, it reveals. It doesn't curse, it activates. And for a system built on fear, a judgment without fear is unbearable, because it sets you free. It makes you responsible. It heals without transaction. It restores without applause. It transforms without needing to be seen. And that transformation begins right now, inside of you. If judgment is happening now, and it is, then your response can no longer be delayed. You can't live between two rhythms anymore. Either you return to the original time, or you'll be swallowed by the artificial one. Because the time of the world is cyclical, but blind. The time of heaven is cyclical and conscious. And that's what defines who crosses over and who drowns. It's not about theology. It's about resonance. It's not about belief. It's about reactivated memory. You were chosen to remember. And those who remember suffer because they have to see what no one else wants to see, walk where no one else wants to go. But those who remember also heal because they carry the map of return within them. And that return, even if lonely, is the greatest gift you can offer the world, because every restored soul changes the field. Every person in resonance shifts the atmosphere. Every step in sacred time is a note in the symphony the angels await to complete. The Book of Jubilees ends in silence, in fasting, in reverence. And so does this script, not with an emotional plea, but with an echo, a whisper that says, "The time has come. The rhythm has returned. And now you know too much to pretend you didn't hear it. The seal has been broken. The light has entered. And even if everything around you stays the same, you will never be the same again. So close your eyes, breathe, and listen to what no one else can hear for you, the sound of restored time, the sound of your soul returning home.